if we're waiting on a few more people or not. It seems kind of sparse today, but I'm glad that all of you are here. It's good to see you. I want to start off with a little bit of a review. So does anybody remember what we talked about last week? The trial of Christ? Yeah. We talked about the trial of Christ. We also talked about the death, and I think we talked about the burial. So we got all of it kind of wrapped up into one. It was a lot to cover in one, but it always seems like it is. So that was Matthew 27 and John 19. We went through a bunch of that stuff. Cool. What did I have here? Okay, so who was released at Passover instead of Jesus? Barabbas. And who was Barabbas? A revolutionary and a murderer. Some translations will just say he was an insurrectionist or a revolutionary. Others will say he's just a murderer. I think it makes more sense to me personally that he was an insurrectionist. Kind of makes that story kind of jive a little bit better with what we know. What does the word gospel mean? Good news. Okay, good. I figured everybody would know that. That's good. So we're going to be talking about that today, about the good news that was preached and is going to be preached. Who wrote the Gospels? Who were the writers of the New Testament? There were 8 of them. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. It's a good review. Who wrote the first 4 books of the Gospel? I keep saying the Gospels. Who wrote the first 4 books of the New Testament? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Okay, so there's 4. Is there another writer of the New Testament that anybody can think of? Peter. Okay, Peter, Paul, James, and Jude. Yeah, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John wrote John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Revelation. And then we have Jude, James, Peter, Jude and James, the brothers of Jesus, and then Peter and Paul. So there's the 8. Nice. It's good. Does anybody remember any of the divisions in the New Testament? These are good also. I got to remind myself of these, so. What was it? Gospels. History, letters, prophecy is the 4th one that's typically taken, which is just Revelation. So Gospels, history, letters, prophecy, and then you can go, there's all sorts of other divisions that people make besides those, but those are the main ones I think that we should be remembering. Let's see if there's anything else we want to talk about here. I keep breathing into the mic. So who did the Sanhedrin take Jesus to be tried first? So the Sanhedrin convicts Jesus, they say, or condemns Jesus, and they say he's guilty, right? And then they take him to who? Are you thinking? It keeps looking like you're about to say something, so I'm not sure. Pilate. They take him to Pilate, right? And then Pilate sends him back to Herod, and then Herod sends him back to Pilate. So they kind of flip-flop a lot. Nobody really wants to deal with it. Okay, good deal. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the appearances of Christ. So Christ appearing to the women at the tomb, and then the guards, and then we'll also be talking to some of the other disciples and followers that he appears to. So we're going to start out in Mark. That was different than what I saw. Okay, we're going to be starting out in Mark 16. We're just going to be reading verse 1. It's kind of weird how some of the divisions of these lessons are, but All right, Mark 16, verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome purchased sweet-smelling spices so that they might go and anoint him. Does anybody know who Salome was? I had to look this up. It was a little difficult. She's only mentioned once by name. And then in all the other, there's a couple other versions, so we'll look at those here. If you want to flip to John 20 is the next one that we'll look at. So just keep in mind for a minute. So Mark says, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome were there. And then in John chapter 20, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw the stone removed from the entrance of the tomb. So John just says Mary Magdalene. And then keep your place there because we'll come back to it. But Matthew 28 is the other one we want to look at. Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. Now after the Sabbath near dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. So we have this kind of weird situation where Mark says Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. And then Matthew says Mary Magdalene and Mary. And then John says Mary Magdalene, right? And then if you look in Luke, which you don't have to at the moment because we'll come back to it later. But Luke's account, he says that there were more. What he says is, I was skipping a page, no wonder. The women went to the tomb, and among them were Mary Magdalene and Joanna, and Mary the mother of James. So it's mentioned once, but it's mentioned in Matthew 28, Matthew 27, right around there. And what it says in Matthew 27, 27 verse 56, is that among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons, James and John. So the mother of James and John, which is Salome, we're pretty sure. Salome, sorry. So Salome is the mother of James and John, and that's what's being mentioned here. It's kind of strange how there's some textual differences there, but that's the idea is we got Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and John, and Salome. Okay, so we'll move on here. We'll go to John, I think John chapter 20. So, sorry, I know we've been flipping around a lot, but they're trying to compare all the different sections, so we'll be flipping a lot. Okay, so John chapter 20. Can somebody read the first 5 verses? Or the first 4 verses? Anybody want to read?
Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first.
Okay, and then somebody want to read 5 through 8. Anybody in the right side of the room, maybe? We can just keep going back and forth.
Stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who came to the tomb first, went in also, and he saw and believed.
Okay. All right, so Mary Magdalene's at the tomb. She sees that it's empty. She runs and tells Peter. Who is the disciple that Jesus loved? Does anybody know? John. Yeah, this is one of the funniest sections of the entire Bible to me, because John makes sure to let everybody know that he's faster than Peter, and then he tells you multiple times that he runs faster than Peter, because we get down in, and he'll say multiple times, in verse 8, there you go. So the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, like, just so you know, I got there first, right? Which I just think is absolutely hilarious that he mentions that. But this is one of those eyewitness things that John is famous for. He talks a lot about the smells of the room, or the way that things felt, or the way that things looked, right? Which is this I was there kind of, intonation. And this is another one of those where I reached the tomb first. I was there, right? It's that you have to be there. Yeah. He got there first, but he didn't go in first, right? Yeah. So, okay. Oh, and just a quick reminder before I forget also. So when is all this taking place? Does anybody know? Like timeline-wise, day of the week? Because first day of the week, Sunday. Yeah, early Sunday morning. So that's something that I have to keep reminding myself too. It's good to remember the timeline of things that are happening. So died on Friday, and then this is Sunday in the morning, and he's being raised, or he's up and about, right? Okay. And then the next section that we got to switch to is Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 15, and then we'll try and bring some of this together. Okay. Somebody want to read the first 5 verses? Somebody who hasn't read yet? Yep.
Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him, and became like dead men. But the angel answered and said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified.
Somebody want to read the next 5? We got 2 more sections of 5. Somebody on the right side of the room who hasn't read yet. I'm gonna get specific. Don't make me say names. Anybody on the right side of the room who hasn't read yet? Yeah, go ahead.
He is not here, for he is risen. As he said, come see the place where he lay. You go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, as he has told you. So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, Greetings. And came up and took hold of his feet and worshiped him. And Jesus said to them, Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me.
And then the next 5 is the last 5, 11 through 15. Go ahead.
While they were going, behold, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. When they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. So they took the money and did as they were directed. This story has been spread among the Jews to this day.
So Matthew goes a little further than the other verses that we've read. But this is actually my favorite piece of apologetics that I've ever come across. I really love this section here, because what do the chief priests tell the guards? They tell them, when you talk to people about this, lie. Yeah, tell them that somebody came and stole the body, right? Notice that the chief priests don't tell the guards, Go tell everybody the body's there. We've got it, right? Because Jesus' enemies recognize that the tomb is empty, right? That is, I think, to me, so inspiring, right? Because it's not just some fable, right? Like, Jesus' very enemies are saying, the tomb is empty, something happened, right? Now the question is how did it happen, right? And so then you kind of can go down the rabbit hole of, well, I don't know, maybe his disciples stole him. Yeah, but there's something weird with that because the disciples had to change overnight, 50 days later. They hid for 40 days until the day of Pentecost, right? They were terrified. They were scared of the Jews. They were scared of what would happen to them from knowing Jesus and all these different things, right? And then 50 days later, the Spirit comes on them and suddenly they're preaching to the point of torture and death, right? So they come out after the day of Pentecost and they say, okay, we saw him. We know that he's alive, right? And the Spirit has descended on us, and you guys killed him, now we need to repent, right? And so they have this like change almost overnight, and there's a big difference. And so something had to have happened to the disciples, right? They probably didn't steal the body, because if they had just stole the body, why would they change so dramatically, so quickly, right? There's something weird with that. Well, then some people argue, well, maybe Jesus never died, right? Maybe when they took him off the cross that he was only mostly dead. Yeah. Thank you for those that got that. Yeah, okay, so maybe Jesus was only mostly dead, right? And then he got up and rolled the tomb, open and kind of walked out. And he was like, well, I already died once. I don't want any more of this. And so he just didn't come back. And that's really what was happening, was Jesus was scared to come back after he died, right? Well, that doesn't make any sense because there were Romans who were guarding the tomb, who were paid to lie about it, right? And even if you say, well, the payment didn't really happen, right? Well, one way or another, these Romans were here. I don't know the penalty for letting a dead man get away, but the penalty for guarding a prisoner and letting the prisoner walk away was typically that the guards would die, right? So I don't know if I were the guards, if I would go around and be telling everybody, yeah, he just got up and walked away. Like, you lost a dead man? Like, that cannot be good for your career. So for some reason, these guards are telling people the tomb is empty, right? And everybody's accusing the disciples of taking it, but the disciples don't make any sense. So this is my favorite piece of apologetics because it's so simple. And it's so, historical, right? It's just what happened. Here's what we know what happened. The tomb was empty. And now what are you going to believe about it after that? And we have hundreds of witnesses who have said that Jesus was up and alive, right? That's incredible to me. And I just love that Matthew includes that section where they say, okay, all right, well, we got to figure out how to cover this up, so lie about it, go tell people that the disciples took him. And they never found a body after that either. That was the other thing. Because wouldn't that be the biggest thing? If you were the chief priest and you could go and find the body of Jesus and be like, look, he's right here, right? But nobody could ever find the body of Jesus. So Jesus got up out of the tomb somehow, some way, and disappeared. And we believe that he rose from the dead. I just think that's a really cool little section there.
It's obvious that even when the guards reported to the chief priests, and what they had seen, the chief priests were still going to fight the idea of this because they lose their power.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Any other particular thoughts on those verses? Okay. All right, so what time is it here? No, we got time. We got plenty of time. Okay. This is something kind of weird that I wanted to mention. So can anybody tell me a timeline of what happened? Like, what just happened? It's kind of strange. And I guess I'll be a little bit more specific than that because that's kind of vague. So who was at the tomb when they saw the stone roll away? Who were the women at the tomb? Mary Magdalene, right? Was it just her? Well, but one version says it was just her, right? Another version says it wasn't just her, but it was her and Mary, the mother of James and John, right? James and John or James and Joseph? I get confused. Okay, but the Marys, right? Another one says that it was Mary, and Salome. And then the other one says it was Mary, Joanna, and other women, right? So which one was it? All of the above? So did some just keep that out in particular? Like, did some just not mention it? Why? Are they lying? Are they not sure about their facts? Like, what's going on with that, right? In John, it says that, oh my goodness, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to forget his name, so I'm going to look up before I forget. Sorry, 1 second. I did this last night too. I had his name down. Nicodemus, my goodness. In John, it says that Nicodemus came and buried Jesus with Joseph of Arimathea, right? But in the other three, it just says it was Joseph of Arimathea. So which one was it? Does it matter? What do you say if somebody comes up to you and says, none of the Gospels agree? They all say different things, so how do you believe in that? Different points of view? Yeah.
Different writers write the same thing differently. If they tell the story, they will tell it differently because of the things that impacted them.
Absolutely, right? So we got to remember that the gospel writers are human and that they're telling a story, right? Are the gospels a biography of Jesus?
There's some things were left out, so it's
Yeah.
not a total biography.
Right. So, yeah, go ahead.
I think about like when I talk, I'm very wordy.
Yeah.
When he talks, when he talks, he's wordy, but like texting, for example.
Yeah.
I can't get my message across in like 3 words.
Yeah.
But some people can.
Yeah.
And so that could be, just simplistic versus more in-depth writing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you remember September 11th, trying to figure out what was happening in New York?
I was 3. But yes, I know what you mean. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And trying to figure out, and how all of this can be true, but when you put all different stories together, everyone was at a different place. And they saw the planes going in a completely different way.
Yeah. Yeah, in different numbers and at different times and yeah.
It was very confusing, but it was all factual and true.
Right, exactly.
It was also about Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. And so where I was going with the biography thing is the Gospels, the writers, right, are telling this story with a purpose. They're each writing to different people. They're writing to different people groups at different times in different places, right? And so they're trying to get something across. One of the things that's, I don't know if any of you know about this, but some people will accuse John, not necessarily Christians, but some opponents will accuse John of being racist because it's constantly talking about the Jews, right? The Jews are bad. The Jews killed Jesus. The Jews did this, right? And the reason for that is John is writing to Christians who are struggling with getting kicked out of the synagogues. They're Jewish Christians who have converted, right, and are struggling with this fact of their entire culture is changing now because it all revolved around the synagogues and it revolved around these places of meeting, and now they're no longer allowed there because, you're not Jews anymore. And so John is writing to these people and telling them, this happened to Jesus. The Jews kicked Jesus out too, right? The Jews didn't let Jesus come into the synagogues or the places of meeting because they didn't like him either, right? And so John is writing this with a purpose in mind, right? So that might be why he says that as opposed to the other Gospels who aren't necessarily writing to that same people, right? Mark is the shortest Gospel. Does that mean that he was just not telling people stuff? Well, it was possibly also the first Gospel. And so he was just trying to write something down and get it out so that people knew what actually happened, right? And then Matthew might have seen that and gone, let's elaborate a little bit more, and expands, right? And write some more things down that he saw. Same thing with John and Luke, right? And so each of the Gospels have a different purpose. They're different writers. They have different things that they want to emphasize in mind. And so that's just something to keep in mind when you run across these textual variants like this, specifically with the death of Jesus. And there's a lot of them, right? Is these writers are trying to get different points across or emphasize certain points, or they're remembering certain things. Like Luke went and interviewed a bunch of witnesses, right, and said, what happened? And got a bunch of eyewitness interviews, right, that he wrote down and put into his account. And so it's possible that some people remember seeing some things a little differently. But What's the main point? What do each of the Gospels say? Jesus died. He died on a cross, right? And the tomb was empty in 3 days. And that's what they say. And that's what's important, right? Is that we're remembering that Jesus died, he was buried in the tomb of Joseph, and he rose after 3 days. And the Jews lied about it, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Another thing in writing from perspective is if they'll go to the store or something, my mom come home and say, hey, I saw our daughter Sarah at the grocery store, bumped into her, and her husband and kids might have been with her as well, but, I don't mention those. It's like
Right.
Sarah. And
Yeah.
it's just, the others are there, but you're pointing out, like, the person maybe of more interest to you and more perspective, more relatable. So.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, these are all good thoughts. Thank you all for your comments.
I wonder too, because Mary Magdalene was so close to Jesus, maybe that was the mysteries that she was mentioned. And then Joseph of Arimathea, he's the one that gave the tomb. So, those were key players in this.
Yeah. Well, and going along with that, I can't point to verse, but I believe that there are some women that stay at the tomb, right? And so Mary runs, and some people stay at the tomb, and then Mary comes back, right? And so we have kind of a confused timeline also. So part of it could very well be these textual variants, but that actually transitions into the next thing. So the curriculum that we have, the book says the early events of the risen Christ might be as follows, because this is another way to make sense of all of it. It's a little convoluted, I think, but it's correct, right? So A, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went to the tomb to complete the burial ritual. Mary Magdalene immediately leaves, seeing the tomb opened, to tell Peter and John. But the other women stay, and they were told by the angels, right? Because some of them mention one, some of them mention two. The women that stayed were told by the angels to tell the disciples that Jesus had risen and to meet him in Galilee. The frightened Roman guards flee. Peter, John, and Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, right? So they come back. Once they come to the tomb, Peter and John leave, but Mary Magdalene stays crying, and then Jesus appears to the other women. Oh, no, sorry, he appears to Mary Magdalene. Mary tells the disciples, and then Jesus appears to the other women. And then the women told the disciples. So that's one way to kind of mash all of them. I don't want to say mash because that sounds brutish. Meld all of them together, right? Is to say, okay, well, maybe these accounts were happening at different times, and some of the writers said some things were happening at some times versus others. But the main point is that, don't let somebody kind of bog you down in well, all these accounts are different. They don't tell the same story. Because, yeah, they do. The story is Jesus died. Jesus rose from the dead after 3 days. He was up and alive, walking around and saw people, right? And they talked to him. And that's the important part. But these are things to be aware of, right? To be prepared to give an answer should anybody ask. Okay. Good deal. We got through that in 5 minutes, roughly. Okay. All right. All right, so let's go to the next lesson. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Jesus' third, fourth, and fifth appearances. So Jesus' first, right, I was just mentioning this, was to Mary Magdalene. And then Jesus' second was to the other women also, right? Now we're going to turn to Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 43. So it's kind of a big section, but we'll get through it. Okay. Anyways, sorry. I don't know if any of your translations mention this, but my translation in verse 10, just while I'm thinking about it, it says Joanna, the wife of Chuza, who is Herod's steward. Does anybody else's say that? Or is that just mine? Luke 24, verse 10. No, doesn't say that? Okay, that's all right. Mine sometimes has little contextual notes that it puts in that sometimes I can't tell if it's actually in there or if it's a contextual note, so good to double check myself. Okay, anyways, we can talk about that later. Luke 24, verse 13, so the road to Emmaus. And then that very day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place. While they were talking and discussing it, Jesus himself came up and began walking with them. But their eyes were closed, prevented from recognizing him. Then Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing with one another as you walk along?" And they stood still, looking brokenhearted. I'd never read that. This is, again, probably a little quirk of my translation. But I never read that they were brokenhearted before. What does your guys' say? Sad, dismayed, yeah. Yeah, I kind of like that idea of them being brokenhearted, right? Which doesn't make it more or less true, but it just emphasizes that they're just like crestfallen. They're looking at him like, you're crazy. You don't know what's going on? So they stood still looking brokenhearted. One of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger visiting Jerusalem who is unaware of the things which have happened here in recent days?" He asked, "What things?" And they replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, powerful in deed and word in the sight of God and in all the people. And how the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel and set our nation free. Indeed, besides all this, it is the 3rd day since these things happened. And also some of the women among us shocked us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and they did not find his body. Then they came back, saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as exactly as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then Jesus said to them, "O foolish men, and slow of heart to trust and believe in everything that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things, and then only then to enter his glory?" Beginning with Moses, and throughout all the writings of the prophets, he explained and interpreted for them the things referring to himself found in all the scriptures. Then they approached the village where they were going, and he acted as if he were going further. But they urged him not to go on, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day has just about ended." So he went inside to stay with them. And it happened that as he reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it, and breaking it, he began giving it to them. Then their eyes were suddenly opened by God, and they clearly recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the road and opening the scriptures to us?" Then they got up that very hour and went back to Jerusalem, and found the 11 gathered together, and also those who were there with them, saying, "The Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon." They began describing in detail what had happened on the road and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself suddenly stood among them and said to them, "Peace be to you." But they were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a spirit. And he said, "Why are you troubled, and why are doubts rising in your hearts? Look at the marks in my hands and my feet, and see that it is I myself. Touch me and see. A spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." Okay. Okay. So again, what did the Jews want out of the Messiah? What did the Jews want out of Messiah versus what they got? What were they thinking when they said the Christ is going to save Israel and free it? Overthrow the government, probably a much more physical response. And so that's what these guys were discussing along the road is, wow, we really thought that was going to be the one. And it wasn't. But little did they know, Jesus is there and explaining to them that it was in fact what happened. So does anybody's, hold on one second. Let me read this here. 25 through 27. Does anybody's mention more specifically the verses, like the things that Jesus reminded them of? scripture-wise, like which scriptures that he was minding of, because the book here asks, before revealing himself to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, he reminded them of what scriptures? And mine doesn't particularly talk about that, but I don't know if any of yours did. No? You have references? Okay. Let me see. I might have some too. What are some of those references?
Genesis 3:15 and 12:3, Numbers 21:9, Deuteronomy 18:15, John 5:46, Psalms 16:9. You might read all of them.
Let's take a couple. I actually do kind of want to read some of these because I didn't get to go through these recently, and we have more time than I thought. We have another 5 minutes, so let's kind of go through these. Let's go through some of these. Which ones did you mention? Can you read them slowly? I can get Genesis 3:5. Does somebody want to get the next one?
The next one is Genesis 12:3.
Okay. Who's got that one? Okay. Next one.
Numbers 21:9. It's tiny.
That's okay.
I think it's 9.
Let me double check here. I don't actually have these references, so I'm glad that you did. 21:9, you said? Who wants to get that one? Yeah? Okay. And then next one?
Deuteronomy 18:15.
Okay. And I think that might be the last one that we get here. I can get that one if you guys want. Okay, Genesis 3:5. For God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. 3:15. Okay, I was going to say, I'm like, that doesn't seem right. And I will put enmity, open hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall fatally bruise your head, and you shall only bruise his heel. Right? So people think, many people think, it's not like a fringe topic, but a lot of people think that that's what this is referring to, is that when they put the nails through Jesus' feet, we have some examples of bones that they found of crucified people where actually it's not like you see it and they don't like pierce both of his feet like this. They actually have, I'm sorry, you can't see it. They don't pierce his feet through the front, we think, but rather, I'm dropping everything, but rather, they have like a pedestal, and what would happen is his feet would be like this, and they would drive a nail through the heel right there so that he would be able to stand. So his feet would really be like straight up and down like this, and they would drive nails through their heels into the sides of the cross. So it's commonly depicted as if it was driven directly through the front of his feet, but we have some examples of Roman crucifixion that archaeology has unearthed where they have actually driven nails through his heels. So that's what people think that this is referring to, is actually the crucifixion of Jesus where they drove the nails through his heels. So you shall bruise his heel, and he shall fatally wound you in the head, right? Which is that idea of Satan falling down. Okay, who's got the next one?
Is it Genesis 12:3?
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Go ahead.
I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Who has the next one?
21:9, right?
I think so. Is that what you had? That's okay. Yeah. It does.
Made a bronze serpent and set it on the pool, and if the serpent bit anyone, look at the bronze serpent.
Yeah, that is one of the ones, I struggle with some of these prophecies, even the ones that Peter mentions in Acts 2, where he goes through and he says, see, look, this is clearly Messiah, and he mentions a lot of like Psalms and such things that I think are kind of off topic. But this kind of goes back to, so how does that relate to what we're talking about? How does that relate to the crucifixion of Jesus?
Could you read it again?
So what happens is the children of Israel are plagued by serpents, and they say, hey, God, can you take this away from us? And he says, no. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you make this bronze serpent, and you're going to put it up in the middle of the camp, and whenever any one of you is bitten by a serpent, I want you to look at that pole, right? And when you look at that pole, you will be healed and you won't have any problems. So he doesn't take it away, but he says that. Go ahead.
Jesus interprets that one for us because he says, as Moses lifted up serpent in the wilderness, so shall the Son of Man be
Yeah.
lifted up.
Yeah, so that's how that one relates. So pretty good, but go ahead.
I think the interesting thing, this whole road to Emmaus thing, is Jesus had to show that he was hidden in plain sight in every book of the Bible.
Yeah, yeah,
Hidden in plain sight. So even Satan didn't know and didn't try to foil the plan in plain sight. And then when you start looking into it deeper, it starts falling into place. All of these hundreds of prophecies forecasting of what was going to really happen.
yep,
Even the disciples for 3 years couldn't figure it out.
right, right.
So the road to Emmaus for Jesus to say, look, starting with Moses and Pentateuch and going through all the prophets, this is what happened.
Right, right.
It dawned on them so much that they got up and ran back.
And that's the ultimate point of where I'm going with reading all these is throughout the entire Bible, just like Tom was saying, throughout everything, Jesus is hidden in plain sight, even in those stories that didn't seem to have anything to do with the Messiah, right? Like the serpent being raised up in the wilderness. But Jesus mentions, like, that's exactly what I'm doing. That's what's happening to me, right? Like Mark was saying. He decodes that one for us. He says this is happening. So thank you guys all for your comments. I really appreciate all of you guys talking and reading. I guess we'll talk to you next Sunday.